Okay, so before the break, we were talking about process, looking around, noticing things, locating precise points on them, and so forth. And then during the break, someone brought up the fact that I had mentioned something about the advanced training, that we would perhaps not be getting to that point, and then what does that actually mean? So we were talking about the levels before that. We're going to be treating level 0 to 6, and 0 to 6 is 7 tiers of material on the pathway to ascension. Then we have also established level 7 and level 8, which is what we consider the advanced training or advanced training course. Now, that does not mean, and this is why I bring this up at this point, because we've already kind of introduced one process, and I wanted to bring this up, that there's actually many applications of the type of processing that we do and the process instructions as we're giving them. For example, it was the early experiments, the types that we talk about, the processes in the formal session, and for example, the process of looking around, which is part of getting presence in session. These are elementary or fundamental processes, but they're actually, believe it or not, part of what led us to develop some of the advanced training material. It opened up kind of new vistas for learning about what we consider spiritual ability. We don't use a lot of mystical terms in systemology. We don't use psychic or psionic or really anything that's already been kind of has its own connotations to it. So we do talk a lot about spiritual ability, and spiritual ability, as far as we can tell, when you reach the uppermost points of it, that we can imagine, well, it's fairly unlimited. And so pretty much whatever a being is doing, whatever a spiritual being is doing, is what is within its ability to do. Right now, most people are kind of compulsively and continuously occupied with handling the human condition and so forth, but pretty much any of the faculties of that, or any of the faculties when people have asked about ESP or other things like that, that's basically what we classify as spiritual ability. And this is not something that an individual goes out for, when we're doing this processing and working towards defragmentation. Our goal is defragmentation. Our goal is creating a more able individual that can handle the human condition, that can handle the basic, ups and downs of life. And so what happens, though, as a result of that is, as we pull back some of the layers of fragmentation, as we actually improve the individual's personal awareness and actual abilities, these other facets sometimes do come into view. They're not the main focus of the work at this point. I've spent many years running around the esoteric New Age communities and so forth, and looking at the type of material that just generates effects directly, if that's what you're going for. But the uppermost abilities that we can actually reach, when that's not for me to define. That's not really for the Systemology Society to define. We do treat more of that at the uppermost levels, but that's once they pretty much kind of start to awaken or unfold for an individual naturally, as a result of peeling away these layers of fragmentation that are keeping an individual shielded from their own self, from their own knowingness and beingness. These other things can come into view. So the reason I bring this up now, there's advanced applications to pretty much all of the processes that we deal with, particularly those that we consider objective processes involving masses, involving things. For example, look around the room and spot specific spots, notice specific things. This is objective processing. We're dealing with the objective external universe, the physical material universe, that, again, we mentioned this in the basic course, but we're not treating this as illusionary. these are very much a part of the reality agreements that we have made in which to experience this universe, this physical material existence. And so we don't take that for granted. We talked before the break about a lot of the automation that takes place, taking an imprint of something and then just going off of that. The reason why we deal with some of these basic objective exercises in our systemology is to actually increase an individual's communication with the physical universe rather than withdrawing from it, and also to rehabilitate an individual's actual participation in that, rather than, sometimes actually putting attention and awareness on an object or a wall, for example. It's interesting sometimes to see when an individual, where they reach like a certain realization point on that. For some, it's as if they're actually seeing a wall that they've walked past who knows how many times, but they're actually seeing it for the first time, as if for the first time, as self, not just on a relay, picking up cues from the environment, processing through the human condition, and so forth. We've talked about how that works with the zoo line and the perceptions and processing information in the basic course. So no reason to get into that. But the reason I also bring this up is to show that some of these objective processes, they're not trivial. And for example, if a seeker wants to experiment with this a bit, you can start with the previous process, as given, seated comfortably in a room, and then once you reach the end point with that, you close your eyes and repeat the process using essentially an imaginary view of the room. And when we're treating the professional course, things kind of shift up at the more upper level levels of work, but we're not very concerned with we're not concerned with straining about, or the accuracy of such an experiment. It's simply, after an individual has done something, physically with the objective universe, taking, for example, taking a book or so forth, and, noticing certain points about it, or looking at a wall, noticing certain points about it. The same exercise is then done, usually seated or lying down if that's easier for some people to practice, but essentially with eyes closed. And then, you would essentially do the same steps again. You would be looking at the wall, but looking at the wall as if you're just, an awareness being there, present in the room, looking at the wall, not necessarily from the perspective of the body or the body's eyes. And again, at these lower levels of the pathway, I'm just introducing this. At these lower levels of the pathway, we're not stressing, again, how accurate or how significant. Most of the time, what's going to happen when you're dealing with stuff like this is you're going to get actually, an initial impression that's actually semi-accurate, if not incredibly vague. You're going to get something initially that's actually semi-accurate, and then what ends up happening as a result of continuing it as, an imaginative exercise, there's a lot of, some have called it interpretive overlay or dub-in, but there's a lot of information that is imaginatively superimposed onto, for example, what you were expecting or so forth. So, at this juncture, I'm just introducing this as an idea. It's also suggested actually in, we're working with still the professional course lesson 1, PC1, found in Pathway to Ascension, Volume 1, and or the professional course booklet number 1. I don't have any with me at the moment. Before the full class is over, or course is over rather, we'll try to get. I'll try to make sure to bring in the copies of the booklet versions of this so you can see to compare. But this is again just mentioned in passing within that first lesson, because a lot of the objective exercises that we introduce early in, just to get someone in the session, just to kind of get presence, just to, collect actualized awareness and so forth. These don't just go away. They're elementary, not just because they're minuscule. They're elementary because they actually reappear throughout the work, and you can apply them in various ways. So one of the things is to, if you are going to play with any of the advanced work, and this is not just for beginners, but all throughout the pathway and upper levels, you want to acknowledge any of the wins you actually get with something like this. You want to acknowledge the fact that you did it, and not perform this exercise again concerned with accuracy, where you're visualizing or imagining the wall, and then constantly opening your eyes to check and make sure that the details or whatnot are there. Again, a lot of that just kind of ends up being filled in, so to speak, from even memory or whatnot. It's just kind of like the imagined scenery. So expect, when you deal with any kind of advanced application at any level, that you're going to be dealing with some imaginative dub-in and so forth, mixed in with that. So moving on here, another process we can introduce is also integral to the opening procedures of the formal session. And so that's why before the break I was mentioning some of this is a little bit of review from the basic course, in terms of the fact that some of the actual processes were introduced just in the form of that script, that formal session script, but there isn't really a lot of explanation given with that script. That was just kind of used as an example. And it's a good formula to use to kind of keep you out of trouble and just be able to work through the various material, especially if you're working solo or just learning as a pilot. Eventually, some of that material it was really there just to keep someone from having to do the guesswork of it and trying to figure out the communication pattern of what it means to be in session. That was a big question for many years with the Systemology Society. Actually, everyone understood theories and they understood basic processes, giving people instructions, but the kind of back and forth that was expected to make a session effective, that was kind of hit and miss along the way. So with the formal session script, all we've kind of done is isolate a basic kind of pattern that will work for you, but it isn't something that has to be stringently memorized or adhered to as some kind of dogmatic scripture or something. Once an individual understands why those steps were put there, why we actually why it's presented the way it is, and then how that can still be altered perhaps to be more fluid or whatnot. But the let's see, command of the mind-body connection, and this is where we have previously knowingly self-directed our attention to spot things. So look around, notice things, spot things. Now we're going to make a deliberate intended action. So before we were just kind of selectively directing our attention, looking around, noticing things, really noticing them. Spotting various points and so forth, giving it our full attention and awareness. Now we start to move into handling the body, handling the genetic vehicle, if you want to be, truly systematic about your terminology. So in this point, or in this process, the basics is to have you're deliberately intending to reach and withdraw from various objects, or even just points, spots on a wall that have been noticed. The same, for example, could even be the spots that were used, when you look around, notice things or notice spots. Here we're going to practice, intentional reach and withdraw. And this seems to some people fairly elementary, but you would be surprised just how much of this is actually set on automatic in most everyday life in the human condition. So again, by not only are we exercising greater control over the body, we've already brought awareness and presence into it with the preliminary steps. Here we start to engage that awareness, that higher presence on operating with the body, and again, knowingly, deliberately, intentionally, so forth. So, now before we get too much into processing, I actually mentioned before the break that we were going to talk about overrun and underrun, because in addition to introducing the first steps on the pathway and kind of bridging from the basics and the fundamentals into the greater work and applications of systemology, I promised that this course was going to focus or kind of cater directly to the solo practitioners, the solo pilots among you, in lieu of the idea of strictly for at least 4 years, 5 years, we were pretty much confining our work and our experimental methods to traditional co-piloted sessions involving 2 people. So this is important because, again, if you're going to be operating on your own without the assistance of an individual, then you're going to find that it's a little tricky without learning all of this stuff ahead of time. So I don't want to just jump into the processes themselves. Processes and instructions as we go through this progressively, they're not very difficult. That's really not what the challenge is when it comes to taking up the pathway. This is something that really anybody could do. However, the fact that we are applying it as systematic processing, that's something that we originally spent years just training pilots, specialized professionals to do, and originally as part of establishing a form of spiritual counseling for Mardukite ministers. But this has evolved to become essentially a self-empowerment, self-improvement, self-enlightenment, whatever you want to classify it as, using common newspeak of the New Age, and it's expanded beyond that, and it's for the first time we've been able to bring it to a level where an individual might actually be able to apply it to themselves, independent of that co-pilot. Now, that isn't necessarily ruling out the idea of getting together with friends and doing this, or having, more importantly, having a partner. This is really more of a 2-person thing because it's a very personal thing. It isn't something you want a lot of spectators, involved with. We'll probably, within this course, we might get a participant here maybe to do a scripted demonstration of how various things might operate. But really, this is something an individual ultimately has to do for themselves, regardless of whether or not they're being assisted by someone. And the more secure and safe you feel in that environment, the better off you are. Having any concerns about interruptions, or if something that's said is going to affect what someone thinks of them, or anything like that, or might be recorded somewhere that could be used again. These things actually take an individual out of session. They're not going to be able to, they're not feasibly going to be able to apply full self-honesty that's available to them to that session. They're going to be concerned about other things. And this is one of the reasons why some of the elements that we have applied within our systemology that have appeared elsewhere, other traditions and other religions for that matter, they haven't always gone so well, or they haven't always worked out so well, even if the premise was good. So this is something we want to make sure that again, an individual feels comfortable in the session, whether they're even operating alone or not. So let's get into the overrun and underrun. So when I talk about getting into trouble, when I talk about solo practitioners getting into trouble, really what that means, it's nothing to worry too much about. because it's all correctable when you know what you're doing. But what that means is having a handle for example, how long to run a process. So we've talked about getting into session, we've talked about establishing presence and so forth, but now what about, actually the running of the process and how long to run it? So we've got two terms really for, there's three terms that we'll introduce: endpoint, underrun, and overrun. But really the underrun and overrun are the 2 points that we're kind of trying to avoid here. And so in order to, I'll just point these out to kind of safeguard your journey. For example, if a process is left incomplete, then the seeker is not going to gain the new realization that the process was actually meant to establish for them. So when we say an endpoint, that's the point to basically end your process. So the ones we've talked about, for example, with some of the objective processing, things looking brighter, the room looking brighter, having brought more presence and awareness and attention to present time, that when in the act of doing so, things actually seem more vivid or brighter. This could also include new realizations. And when we say realization, this sometimes kind of confuses some people because they're thinking, that it has to be something like, completely mind-blowing or some new vista of knowledge, whereas processing is done so many runs of various things that a new realization at a particular point is whatever the new realization is, for that moment. It could really be anything, and they're going to differ depending on what you're handling. For example, like when I mentioned with the wall, there's been times where seekers have had the sudden realization that there's a wall there that they've passed this wall a million times before, and suddenly they're like, whoa, I just finally realized there's and other things can come into play with that. You could come to a realization of who's actually creating that wall, things of that nature. So in addition to that, we also have increased awareness. And so that's, every one of our processes are pretty much directed to getting an individual point of increased awareness. So, but this is what occurs as the endpoint. So you're running a process during your session, and at whatever point you find something like this taking place, that is your endpoint. You may not have solved every issue for every lifetime you had with that one process and that one session, but at the point that the process has basically accomplished what it's supposed to do in that given moment of time, one of these things, and these are just examples, but one of these things may take place. And so the reason why we call it underrun and overrun, we talk about running a process. Underrun would be basically, running the process short of reaching the endpoint. And overrun then would be running a process past the point where the endpoint was reached, and you continued, running it anyways. I kind of listed, and this is not a complete list, but I just kind of, to illustrate the difference between underrun versus overrun, we have irritable and anxious, or for example, with underrun, we have irritability, whereas with overrun, we see like more tired and fatigue. With underrun, there's more anxiousness kind of left over by, ending the process prior to the point of getting to the endpoint. Whereas if the endpoint has been missed and the process continues to run, things start to feel much heavier. And these are, kind of subjective terms, but they kind of illustrate, again, another example, would be, for example, let's say in everyday life, and I'm just pulling this one up right now. For example, in everyday life, the proper position, end point of the door is to be closed. And so, you enter the room and you walk through and you make a motion or whatever, and the door swings. If it doesn't close all the way and you leave it open, you continue to walk, and turn around, you're going to see that you've left things unhandled. The door is still open. You may have made whatever, half measured attempt to do it, but the point of the end point of what is desired to occur has not yet happened. In contrary to that, let's say you slam the door and just sit there and keep pushing it closed. It's already closed. There's nobody on the other side trying to get in. You're going past the point where the door is now closed and you're just pushing on it. It's going to make you feel more tired and heavy. And so it just kind of happens to work out that way. The physical effort, accomplishing things, processing, the way our systematic processing applies, it's the same conditions. The same thing is happening. The other danger of underrun would be because systematic processing is designed to mimic and mirror the way in which the mind system is already functioning, and it is meant to basically apply itself to the way the universe has been wired to maintain its existence. So when you are doing systematic processing, pulling things up, you start resurfacing things, you start handling, some of that deeper, heavier stuff. Right now we're just looking at things and moving objects around in level 1, or in level 0 here. But the universe, the world at large, continues running that process. And so when you restimulate things, when you pull things up and you leave them unhandled in processing, you end the process, you end the session prematurely, and you go out into the world. I hate to break it to you, that process is still running. And it's going to be running based on the triggers and the stimuli of an uncontrolled environment, the very environment that you're trying to, defragment your mishandling of in the past. So it's very important when you take this up to, again, treat it as a serious study. It doesn't seem very complicated in its application. Certainly the instructions, the words aren't. We've tried to minimize the amount of vocabulary in establishing this new spiritual science, but this is, again, we are dealing with the human condition, we're dealing with the physical universe, and we're dealing with all existence. So
the Joshua Free imprint, JFI Publications, in conjunction with Mardukite Academy and the Systemology Society, present the single greatest breakthrough of the 21st century for all humanity. The perfection of a new standard systemology, a complete map for the way out from the bottom to the top, and your key to being an ascended master in this lifetime. Everything you need is contained in 3 progressive, self-guiding courses: the Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course, the Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, and the Keys to the Kingdom Advanced Training Course. And each should be studied and applied in their intended sequence and order as displayed in this video. All 3 courses combined are available as 5 standard hardcover volumes, but also as 33 installments, since each single course lesson is also available individually as a pocket-sized manual. The Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course includes Being More Than Human, Realities in Agreement, Windows to Experience, Ancient Systemology, A History of Systemology, and Systemology Processing. The Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, including processing levels 0 through 6, includes in Volume 1, Increasing Awareness, Thought and Emotion, Clear Communication, Handling Humanity, Free Your Spirit, Escaping Spirit Traps, Eliminating Barriers, and Conquest of Illusion. The Pathway to Ascension Volume 2 includes Confronting the Past, Lifting the Veils, Spiritual Implants, Games and Universes, Spiritual Energy, Spiritual Machinery, The Arcs of Infinity, and Alpha Thought. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 7 in Volume 1 includes The Secret of Universes, Games Goals and Purposes, The Jewel of Knowledge, Implanted Universes, and the supplementals Systemology Biofeedback and Systemology Procedures. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 8 in Volume 2 includes Entities and Fragments, Spiritual Perception, Mastering Ascension, Advancing Systemology, and the AT Supplement Systemology Piloting. All titles are available from your favorite bookseller. Explore new standard systemology today, and may you never be the same.